Marbon Shem Egen Shirtel. I welcome everyone to today's share from Rabbi Smith. Shlita on common chinuch questions. That's where it's bunch and share. Call Egen Shirtel 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com.
Today's sukkah is, believe it or not, based on a question I was asked by a candy man. The favorite person in shul that gives candies. And he was told that he's really doing an avla because he's giving the children the candies and they're eating before Havdalah. So is that a problem of neiva? He's enabling a yid to do an aveira. But as we'll see, there's really a more serious issue here. And in fact, someone told him sometimes the boys don't make a bracha, so there's a double issa. But he heard epis that when it comes to food, you don't deny a child, and you can give a child to eat even if he doesn't make a bracha, and even before kiddush. And the truth is, as we'll see today, this question about giving food to children in the wrong time is a sugya gedoyla. It's negayah to giving a child to eat before davening, before he does ner Hanukkah, before kiddush, before Havdalah, to give him out of the sukkah. As we'll see, it's a timely and timeless sugya, giving milk after meat. If you won't wash netilas yodayim, we'll soon see a fascinating shayla. Where twice a year we all become candy men. We give our children the kloyes v'goizim, the leil seder, is a mutter to give them before kiddush. So basically, as we'll see, this question, is it taka mutter to give a child food to eat because the child needs food? He's right and he's wrong, but the problem is he's more wrong than he's right. And then we'll learn the sugya, we'll see. The emphasis is that we have a big agenda today, so we have to be mekatze in the Havdalah. But basically, there's a mitzvah deraisa of chinuch, which is really two parts. A parent has to mechanech a child to do mitzvos, buy him a lulav, give him matzah, and also prevent the child from doing averos. But that mitzvah of chinuch is only on the parents. If a yid sees a child doing an averos, not his child, he doesn't have to stop the child. We paskin in Shulchan Aruch and Shin Mem Gimel. If you're not a parent, it's not your business. I always tell the Bachrim, brothers are not mechuyev in chinuch. They always like to beat up the younger children. There's no chiyuv. It's only on parents. Pashtus is on the father. The Mishnah Berurah is also the mother. And also chinuch has a certain age. The age is when the child is able to do that mitzvah. If you buy him tzitzis, you give him a dal of minim. The exact share is very hard to say. It depends on the child and depends on the mitzvah. But basically, this is very clear. The mitzvah of chinuch is only if he's a gil chinuch, number one, and number two, only if you're a parent. So now we're left with an unacceptable conclusion. Does that mean that I could go over to a child and give him tarfus to eat? And could a parent give a child tarfus if he's lo yagil chinuch? It doesn't sound right. Maybe there's timtum alev, but is it true there's no problem of giving a child tarfus? Can a person put a child on an outfit that contains shatnez? He's a baby, lo yagil chinuch. Can you bring a young kohen into an oil hameis? It doesn't sound right, but why not? I thought chinuch is dependent on higil chinuch and has to be your child. So here we come to the aside of today. Basically, it's a Gemara in the end of Yevamos Kuf Yud Daled, with the Gemara darshan from three different psukim. The issa that we're going to refer to today, which is the aside of today, of called Safina. Zok the Gemara, it says, Lo yisoichlum, don't eat shrotzim, ki sheketz heim. And the Gemara is concerned, it already says the issa of shrotzim. Why does the pasuk repeat this whole pasuk? Zok the Gemara, lahazik gedoyel malaktanim. To put this very clearly, there's an issa on every single yid, me and you. We can't supply, safina means to provide or supply. We can't give any child, even if it's not our child, we can't give a child to do an issa. It's talking about the issa of shrotzim. The Gemara quotes a second pasuk regarding the issa of dam. Dam, don't give any child, even not yours, dam to drink. And the third, the most famous, Emor v'Amarta, regarding kahuna, Lahazik gedolim alaktanim. You can't take a baby kohen into an oil hameis. The chiddush of this issa of sfiyah or safina, which is one and the same, is two parts. First of all, the issa of sfiyah is even if it's not your child, even a stranger. Don't give a stranger tarfus. And a bigger chiddush, even if he's lo yagil lechinuch. As Mr. Burr says, to bring a kohen into oil hameis, even a baby is a problem. Mr. Burr discusses an Aisha's kohen that has a baby, because she can't bring that child into oil hameis. Now you have to realize, if I give a baby tarfus, I'm not oival nefneiva. Because the baby is lo yagil lechinuch, he's not doing an issa. It's my issa. Me as a gadol, I can't eat tarfus, and I can't give a child tarfus. It's not chinuch, because lo yagil lechinuch. It's not lefneiva, because the child is too young. It's an issa of safina, just like there's an issa wearing shatnez. I can't give another Yiddish child to do an issa. And the Mr. Bura and Shin Mem Gimel, Sivka and Dalet spells this out. So we have basically two different isurim. One is chinuch on the parent, only higil chinuch, and number two, to give him tarfus, or give him any issa for that matter, even a non-parent, and even lo higil chinuch. Oy bazoi, we have a lot of problems. The candy man should not give a child to eat before kiddush. It's not his child. Safinon. How do you give your child to eat before kiddush, before davening? You'll say, I'm not feeding the child, but that's wrong. Because the Gemara in Shabbos, that Tzadik Amid Beis discusses giving a child a chag of tameh, a tray for grasshopper, and as Rashi explained, there's an issa of safinon. You're giving him to play with, but he's going to eat it. And that's a chiddush. You're giving him a live chagav, and it's considered safinan, because first he'll kill the chagav, and then he'll eat it. So we see safina is lav dafka putting it into his mouth. It's giving him the opportunity, or setting up the situation, supplying him with an issa. So now we have a host of questions. Giving him to eat before Havdalah, before kiddush. As we said, the candyman is a problem, and we'll soon see many other problems. Giving him milk after meat. It's endless. So maybe we'll suggest the following. True, there's an issa deraisa of safina, and I must tell you, like most Rishonim, safina is an issa deraisa. It's based on psukim. But maybe the only issa of safina is when you give him an issa deraisa to do. After all, the three psukim about dam, shratzim, and tuma, they're all isuri deraisa. Who said if you give him to eat before davening or before kiddush, which at most is the rabbanon, maybe there's no safina? Or maybe you'll say zil basataima. The Trumas Hadeshin Chelik Beis Simon Samach Beis explains what's taka the reason for the issa of safinan. Shalei argilu oisei laver aveiros. Ukashayigdal yivakish limudai. You train him now, he'll do it later. So once the Isses don't train the child to do Isurim, maybe it includes the Rabbanans also. Or, as we said, if the three Psukim are talking about the Isis, who gives you the right to extend it to Isuri the Rabbanan? And indeed, the Rashba in Yavamas Kuf Yudalid, Mashmali, he writes, that by Issa the Rabbanan, there's no Issa of Safinan. Like this Rashba, you could give your child to eat before Kiddush, before Havdalah, without a bracha, milk after meat, because they're all Isurei D'Rabbanan. But the problem is that the Rashba himself concludes, Aval Rambam Kosav, the Rambam, the end of Mechilchas Machala Asurais, writes that even by an Issa D'Rabbanan, there's an Issa of Safinan. More so, the Rashba, the Tshuva Chelik Aleph Simon Sadik Beis, writes what I said, what I wrote in Masechti Yavamis, La'alocha Marti Avaloi Lamaisa. So the Rashba himself basically says it's not Lamaisa. So now we have that even the Rashba agrees that Safinan applies even by Yisurei D'Rabbanan. And I imagine that's why in Shulchan Aruch Shin Mem Gimel Aleph, the Mechaber writes you can't give him any Issa, even what's Asa Midivrei Soifrim. And that's the Rambam Shita. He didn't even mention the Rashba. Now, you might think it's a little strange. There's an Issa Safinan, which is the Raisa by Idrabanans, but I'll tell you something that's even more surprising, maybe. The Minchas Chinuch, and it's really based on Rishonim, but the Minchas Chinuch of Reish Lamed Bey says, let's say a person gives another Yid to eat an Issa D'Rabbanan. So Nebuch, the person ate an Issa D'Rabbanan. But the one that gave him that is Ivan Adaraisa of Naiva. Why? You gave him a Michshel. Who cares if it's the Raisa D'Rabbanan? So we see that the one that's eating is not eating the Raisa D'Rabbanan. But the one that's L'Naiva is doing the Raisa. So it's not so outlandish to say that the same applies to Safina. So we're going to have to say that even though the Rashba is Mekel, halacha, but not Lamaisa. So now we have to deal with giving before kiddush to eat, before Havdalah, without a bracha, milk after meat, and a chanam mitzvah, but there's still Safina. So Lamaisa, there is an extremely important word that we have to learn, which is a big heta in our sugya. In Yuma, this takanyana de Yoma, in Yuma ayin chesem et beis, the Gemara makes the following cloud. Tinoikais mutarim b'kulon chutz netilas hasandal. On Yom Kippur, you're allowed to allow the child, obviously a child that's not by mitzvah, to eat, drink, sicha, rechitza. The only issa for a child in Yom Kippur is netilas hasandal. Soktimar, why? Because he can live without leather shoes. But hanach, achila, rechitza, the Rabbi Sayuhu, that he needs for his development. The Rabbi Sayuhu means he needs for his growth, for his development. Like gazu b'rabbanan. Now this is the yisoid. Well, the word Rabbi Sayuhu means it's what he needs it for his health, for his growth, for his development. And basically, the Gemara says there's no issa on the child eating on Yom Kippur. Now, as we'll soon see, in those days they washed the children regularly. The Paiskim Rabbi Mishnah says it in Tafresh Tezayin, quoting a Levush, that today we don't wash children, so there's no het on Yom Kippur. But Achila and Shasiya is perfectly mutter to a child, and until he gets to an age of 12, he doesn't fast. Even 12, some people don't fast today because we're weak. But no doubt about it, Rabbi Sayu means that since he needs it, there's no issa of safina. And I'll give you one beautiful illustration. The Rabbeinu Tam in a Sefer Yosha in Nun Aleph Beis, he writes there that there was some fruma that refused to feed their children on Yom Kippur. Even though it was young children, they told John, you want to eat? Eat. I'm not giving you. Because I don't be oiva on safina. Zokter, the Rabbeinu Tam got it. So the next tshuva is the next Siman Nun Beis, Sivkon Beis is his response. He says that they're being overly frum. Because even though this is safinon, that's when the child could survive without it. But don't forget, they must eat Yom Kippur, the Gemara in Yuma. And therefore, there's nothing wrong with feeding a child on Yom Kippur. Even though that seems like it's safinon, and it really is, you're giving a child issa. But a Yom Kippur that he needs it for his development and his health, the parent's allowed to actually feed his child, there's no issa safinon. So this is what the word we're going to use is ribusayu, what he needs it for his development is mutter. I'll give you l'saber asa oizin. We paskin in Shulchan Aruch stam tzorchei katan chayla she'ein by sakana. You're allowed to call a guy to help a child what he needs. Why? Because a child by definition is weak, he's frail. So it seems that the same idea applies to ribusayu. And indeed in Shulchan Aruch Tafresh Tezayin Aleph, the Mechaber says you're allowed to give a child to eat or drink. Mishnah Berurah says it's not safinan because this is ribusayu. And rather the Mishnah Berurah there does add, but there's no heta today, at least regarding rechitza, because he doesn't need rechitza. So we have the special heta called ribusayu. Now the truth is, you think about it, from the original source it's muchachazoi. A child does not have to eat dam or shratzim. That's why there's an issa of safina. But Yom Kippur, he can't fast the whole day. Now, before we apply this more specifically, we have to say one more heta, another key word. There's a Mechaber Shulchan Aruch Reish Samach Tes Aleph. The minig in those days, today you don't see it. that they used to make kiddush in shul Friday night. The Shabbos made kiddush. The question is, it's nice you made kiddush. Who's going to drink the wine? The Shabbos is not eating there, so it's not makam suda. I give it to a child. It's up to Magen Avram. What do you mean? Why isn't that safina? You're giving the child an issa of drinking without kiddush. The child's not eating there. There's not makam suda for the child as well. You'll give it to a cotton shelo yagi lechinuch. So that's wrong. First of all, safina applies even by lo yagi lechinuch. V'oid, how can you make a bracha and make kiddush to pata lo yagi lechinuch? So the Magen Avram struggles with this, and he says, well, maybe the only safina is by an issa. This is a mitzvah of kiddush. Maybe the fact that it's not an alav, it's mutter, but it's not mistavra. Then he continues, maybe it's mutter because the child yagi lechinuch, but he rejects that. What he comes with, it seems to be his real teretz is that safinan is also by a chilas issa, but not something that's heta bizman issa. And that we're going to use the word of an issa zmani. All the isurim of safinan is you're giving him tarfis, shrotzim, dam, or even tumah to a kohen, where the hechsher is also. Don't give a child an issa. But here, it's perfectly kosher wine. The only problem is it's not makam suda. That's an issa toli bizman. Zok the Magen Avram, there's no issa safinan by an issa toli bizman. So basically, we have the following, that something that's totally in a zman, there's no issa safinan. And the B'chodosh, in Taf Reish Yud Aleph, the end of Sif Katan Aleph, says the same yisoid, but he adds a few key words. HaKosav Mosa Hadvarim Lohem, the Torah gave it over to Chazal to figure out when it's awesome. Now, this is an important point, because it always bothered me. How can you make it by safina if it's a deraisa? So the B'chodosh is giving us the answer. We find regarding Chalamoyed, which is an issa deraisa, do malacha, but the Gemara Taisa says that the Torah gave it over to Chazal to be mekel b'makom davar avid or such heterim. Here it's also a deraisa, but the Torah gave it to Chazal to say when it's asa, when it's not. And evidently, since the isurim of safinan are all isurei chefza, dam, shrotzim, tuma, maybe something that's just a time-related issa, because the wine is mutter, and if you want to sit down and have a suda, you can drink the wine. If it's only time-related, there's no issa safina. And what I found really beautiful, the Yerushalmi in Psachim, Perik Beis, Ois Aleph, has a new pasuk that there's an issa of safina regarding chametz on Pesach. So the kasha that everybody asks is, why do you have to have a fourth pasuk? What's wrong with the first three psukim? And say who adin? So Zot B'loi Haroyim, a beautiful yisoid. Chametz on Pesach is an issa zmani. It's not asad, it's kosher bread, but it happens to be the wrong days. You wait 8 days, it's perfectly mutter. So you have to have a special chiddush that even though it's an issa zmani, there's an issa of safina. But basically what we have, Be'ez Hashem, chinuch is on parents. Safinon is issa deraisa on anybody, even lo yagi lechinuch. But we have three primary heterim. Number one, Rabbi Sayu, we'll soon apply this lemaisa, when the child needs it for his development. Number two, there's a heta of an issa zmani, it's only a time-related issa, and a questionable heta, which we don't paskin like, but it's good to know, the Rashba's heta, maybe by an issa d'Rabbanan, there's no issa of Rabbi Sayu. So now, sit back and enjoy. We're going to learn Al Pisei the Shulchan Aruch, all of these questions of Safinan, and when it's mutter, when it's a problem. So we'll go in order of Shulchan Aruch. I think the most common question, we have children, we have grandchildren, we give them breakfast at home, and then you go to yeshiva and daven in yeshiva. The bell starts to ring. What about Safinan? You're giving him to an issa d'Rabbanan. And don't forget, the Minchas Chinuch and Reish Mem Ches says, according to some Rishonim, it could be nissa d'Oraisa to eat before davening. You might learn, Leisoichu al Adam, Leisoichu Hoshis Ba'al Adimcha. Okay, that's a chiddush, but it's definitely nissa d'Rabbanan. So the answer, what's the het to give your child to eat before davening? We have all three heterim. First of all, after a night's sleep, the child is hungry, he needs breakfast, he needs koyach. Number two, the food is kosher, it's just before davening. And also, like the Rashba, it's adrabanan. And it's a beautiful shitasa here, because the Mechaber says in Kuf Vav Beis, a katan yigil lechinuch is mechuyev to daven. Zok the Magen Avraham, Sif Katan Gimel, but you're allowed to give him to eat before davening. K'maisha kasafti b'simin reish samach tes. And what he's saying is, just like you're allowed to eat before kiddush, he's allowed to eat before davening. Frek the El Yerabba, but why? Lamaisa kid is an issa eating before davening. Zok the Magen Gibayrim, all of our terutzim. The child is hungry, he needs it. Plus you have the Rashba's heta, and he says another yisod. If the issa is only al gaiva, gavecha, gaecha, eating before davening is gaiva, for a child is not gaiva. So he does add, if he doesn't need the food, so let him wait. But the Rav and Mr. Brewer and Simon Kuva both say you're allowed to give a child to eat before davening because of the Ribi Sayu. Now it's a good idea to mechanech a child and say, listen, we adults don't eat before davening, but you need it, and we want you to eat before davening. It's better than daven to eat, to hurry up davening. So you get him a good chinuch, but he has to eat before he goes to yeshiva. He needs the koyach. But what's another important question, which is very standard. A child comes home Hanukkah time, 5 o'clock, 5:30, and he wants to have supper like he always has. Tell him, I'm sorry, we can't, you're not allowed to eat. You have to light Ner Hanukkah. The father's coming home for 6:30. Is it also for the child to eat before Ner Hanukkah? So if he has a shaima to remind him, or he eats a snack, I'm talking about a full-blown meal. So Pashtus, we have all three atayim. Number one, Ribi Sayu, you don't want to starve the child, he's hungry. Number two, it's not an issa chefza, the food is kosher, just an issa zmani. And like the Rashba, you have the heta, it's an issa d'rabbanan before, that's not a derais. And talking the Makar Chaim, the Chavas Yor, and Simon Tov, Reish Nun Beis, regarding the Alminim, writes a little sarcastically, Epstavelt is machmer, don't give a child to eat. Kedarkam, the machmer, whenever it doesn't cost him any money. That's what he writes. But he means to say it's really mutter. But let me tell you, share with you a treat that I found. The Marshag in a Tshuva Chelik Beis Simon Nun Zayin discusses this question of giving a child to eat before a mitzvah. Again, Ner Chanukah, Dalad Minim, davening, a lot of mitzvahs. So he doesn't like the Magen Avram's het of an Issa Zmani. He says you don't find it in Gemara. It's a very good svar, but we don't find it before the Magen Avram. Rabbi Sayu, maybe you could wait. But this is classic Marshag. Zok the Marshag, I have another heter. Or maybe there's no problem in the first place. There is no issa to eat before a mitzvah. Novas, if you have a mitzvah to do, you're mechuyev in a mitzvah, so you have an issa to eat before you do a mitzvah. The issa of eating before a mitzvah is dependent on the chiyuv mitzvah. If you have a issa to eat, mitzvah to do, you can't eat before you do the mitzvah. Zok the Marshag, but a katan has no mitzvahs. A katan is part of a mitzvahs. The mitzvah of chinuch, zok the Marshag, as we know, the lumbus is, the chiv is on the father, not the child. So if he has no mitzvah to do anything, there's no issa. And that's what he says. But he has an unbelievable analogy. This is classic Marshag. Zok the Marshag, an oinin lo yalechem, before kvura, is part of all mitzvahs. But he can't eat tarfus. These parts of a mitzvah is not to be surim. So frag the Marshag, why don't we say that he can't eat because of eating before mitzvahs? And how he can't daven, but if he didn't daven yet, how can he eat before davening? So the Marshag is pashut. The issa is a product of the chiyuv. Since an oyin is part from mitzvahs, there's no issa to eat before davening. So the Marshag has a whole new heta that our child has no issa to eat before a mitzvah because he's no chiyuv mitzvah. Again, the father is a chiyuv chinuch on the father. Now let's see how much we could apply these yisoides, including the Marshag. Let's say a typical case of people are traveling and the child is hungry, wants to eat a sandwich. But there's no washing facilities in a car. Some planes also don't have the ability to wash. So the question is there a heta to give a child to eat bread without netilas yodayim? And that's a problem, because in Shulchan Aruch, the end of Kuf Samach Gimel says, don't feed someone bread if you won't wash, l'fnei. But we're worried also about safina, even if it's not your child. So the emphasis, that's the way it should be done. If indeed you could stop by a road stop and let the child wash, that's what should be done. The question is if it's eating without washing or not eating at all. Let's say you can't stop. So the chayra, this would be a heta of Rabbi Sayu, if the child is hungry. Now typically there are other foods he could eat and tell him to wait for the sandwich. But if it's a question the child is hungry, it's wrong to deprive the child because again, this is the heta of Rabbi Sayu. Now the Lamdan could declare, is there a heta of the Magen Avraham of an Issa Zmani? It's not an Issa Zmani. Maybe taka before washing is like eating tarfus. The bread is not treif, but he didn't wash his hands, he's tummy. So you could falamdav a little bit if the heta of Magen Avraham applies. But it's often that if the child is hungry, it would be Rabbi Sayu. But again, I saw the Ben Ish Chai in Shmini Shana Aleph, Ois Beis points out that there's a big zilzul in the netilas yodayim, and he writes it's kedai to mechanech even a lo yagil lechinach to wash. That's a needs chizuk. But if the child is hungry, there would be a heta to give him to eat without washing. But this is only a lo yagil lechinach. Once he's gil lechinach, he has his own problem. He can't eat before washing, so he should find a way to wash. To give a child to eat that will not make a bracha, again, Shulchan Aruch and Kuf Samach Tes says is lifnei iva. So how can you give a child to eat without a bracha? So could be the same yisoid, that it's not an issa of the chayfetz, that it's perfectly kosher food. The only issue is al tzafinan. So again, avada, when your candyman gives a child candy, he say, make a bracha. You could do both. You could make a bracha and you could eat. But the truth is, we do have the heta of the marshag. It's very possible that the marshag's heta of safinan would apply. If the child has no chiyuv to make a bracha, then maybe there's no issa of eating without a bracha. And I saw tackle the Chanoich Lanar, that's Rabbi Yankel Bloy Seif, in the beginning of Perek Daled, he declares the shayla, if giving a child to eat without a bracha, is that an issa chefza? Because just like eating without a bracha is mo'al, like a zayla, maybe giving a child to eat without a bracha is like a chefza shal issa, like a schayvus agazel. But efshis doima le'issa toli b'zman. Not really toli in zman, but it's not a chayfetz that's awesome. So again, the right way to do it is tell the child, make a bracha. If he's a lo yagil lechinach and you're afraid he won't make a bracha, this is what to be saimach on. This is an issa zmani, as we said, and also if it's Rabbi Sayu of the child. If it's Rabbi Sayu of the child. Now, the truth is it has to be mutter, because if you're going to assume that you can't give a child to eat without a bracha, how could you feed a baby who can't make a bracha? So Taka Rabbi Yankel Blay points out, it has to be, there's a heta, at least by a lo yagil lechinach. Regarding the question of giving a child to eat before kiddush, so you have to realize, even if we're not parents, we're grandparents, so there's no chinuch on a grandparent, but you give your grandchild to eat without kiddush should be an issa safina, even a ben yoima, even a non-parent. But here we have the whole Magen Avraham that we mentioned, that this could be Rabbi Sayu of the child, it could be not an issa of the chayfetz, and the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Samach Tes Kat Nalef Mipnei Kama Taimim, you're allowed to give a lo yagil lechinach to eat without kiddush. Of course, if he's a gil lechinach, so he has his own chiyuv to make sure he has kiddush. But typically the children that go to the candyman are lo yagil lechinach, and Rabbi Mutta, there's no issa of safina. But there's one fundamental question that we have to clarify, which is negeya to Yom Kippur and other shaylos as well. A very basic question. Rabbi Sayu we find in a Gemara Yuma Ayin Chesed Beis that you're allowed to give a child to eat on Yom Kippur because you can't fast. Is that across the board heta? Any food is mutter? There's no issa food to a child. There's no safina. Or maybe the heta is because Rabbi Sayu. And a lollipop is not Rabbi Sayu of the child. It's maybe supports the dentist, but it's not, the child doesn't need it for his development. Maybe we'll say the head of Rabbi Sayu is food that he needs. Maybe potato chips and popcorn is a food that has a certain amount of nutrition. But a candy, stam de Welterei, maybe that's not Rabbi Sayu. So here the question is Rabbi Sayu cross the board all foods or what's necessary for his development? So the truth is, Minehu Bey, we might be able to deduce a maskana. Because 2 of the 3 Isurei Torah of Safinon are food stuff. Dam, I mean, not a very popular food, but they drank dam. And Shratzim was a food. And yet there's an Issa Safina. Obviously, it's not all foods that are mutter, it's food that you need. But Le'idach Gisa, we saw that Rabbeinu Tam and Seif HaYosha explains, why is there no Safinon by food stuff? Because Chazal knew that a child has to eat. We saw what I mentioned earlier, the side of that Chachamim, the Torah was Mastru L'Chachamim, says the Pri Chadash, to decide what's awesome, what's not. And could be categorically food stuff are excluded from the Issa of Safinah. So I found a wonderful Sefer China Ba'abanim Kolchasei, it's Perik Lamed Zayin, Sif Havdalah. He points out the Levushay Srod, Rabbi Baruch Frankel Hagoyis, and the Aruch HaShulchan all seem to learn that the head of Rabbi Sayu is what the child needs. But stuff, nash, that he doesn't need, and I mean nash, I mean candy that have no nutritional benefit, there's no heta of Rabbi Sayu. And that's the psak of the Hilchas Shabbos, B'Shabbos, Perik Zayin, Siv Dalid, that stam lollipops or other food that have no nutritional benefit should be avoided for a child. But he does point out the Yad Ephraim, and that's the Maskon of the Or L'Tzion, Mem Zayin Vav, that the heta is across the board heta, any foods are mutter. So the Candyman, can he give a child to eat on Yom Kippur a lollipop? Or as we began with before kiddush, we could say it's not so pashut. Now the truth is, sometimes the child's hungry, he's at shul, and there's nothing else to eat but lollipops. So that might satisfy his crave for food. So maybe that's mutter. But it's taka not so pashut to give stam things that do not add any nutritional benefit. That might not be the heta of Rabbi Sayu. Interesting question, which I never looked into until this past week, but it was fascinating to me. The Gemara in Pesachim, and it's Kapaskin in Shulchan Aruch Taf Ayin Beis, that Leilei Seder, we give the children kloyas ve'goizim to keep them awake, then kadesh yishlo atinoikis. Now today, if you give your child walnuts, he's going to sue you for abuse. But today it became candies and chocolates and all good to zachem. But you ever wonder, when is this minig in effect? You give your child or grandchild candies. When is that? Before Kiddush or after Kiddush? Let's say the mother's home with the grandchildren, they're running around and they're falling asleep. Should she give them to eat candies? It's before Kiddush. I don't think the minig is able to be over on an issa of eating before Kiddush. When is the minig of giving klois v'goizim? Is it before Kiddush? Safina l'chayra. After Kiddush is perfectly fine. I mean, you have to make a bracha, but it's perfectly fine. So in the Menhagi Chasam Soifa, Perik Yud Sif Tezayin, the Chasam Soifa gave out klois v'goizim after Kiddush dafka. The Vayagid Moshe, the classic Sefer Nochas Pesach, and Test Sif Beis, that the minig is only after Kiddush. Before Kiddush, you're running into a problem of Safinan. But the truth is, if we assume that they're hungry and it's needed, if you give them a decent snack, that might be the heta of Rabbi Sayu. It might be the heta of the Magen Avram. It's not an issa of tarfa. It's not an issa chefza. And it's a pliya because the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Taf Ayin Beis Sif Lamed Aleph, the kids at the beginning of Kuf Yotes, the Aruch HaShulchan and Sif Beis and Kaf HaChaim and Tzadik Vav, all say the minig is to give klois v'goizim before Kiddush. And the Aruch HaShulchan says you give it to him Erev Pesach, but I don't think it means Erev Pesach, it means Erev before Kiddush. But there are enough paiskim that are matir klois v'goizim, and the hezbah is Rabbi Sayu. You give him a good snack, and that basically is Rabbi Sayu. It's not an issa on the chayfetz. At least we could justify the meaning of giving klois v'goizim before Kiddush. Regarding giving a child to eat before Havdalah, so you have to realize that he's not fasting that Shabbos. It's not a tainis chaloim for the child. He already ate 2 sudas. He just finished shalosh sudas. So maybe Rabbi Sayu doesn't even apply, because you can wait till Havdalah. And especially, don't forget, eating before Havdalah is a chashash chalila of misas eskera. So you talk about chamira sakanta misura, And typically the Welt is machmir before Havdalah. You wait for Havdalah, you're not hungry, you could manage. But if someone says the child didn't eat, whatever, he's hungry, so this is what to be saimach on. And we could assume that hopefully that the mitzvah of eskira is someone that has an issa to eat before Havdalah. If the child is not no issa to eat because ripisayu, so maybe that'll be mutter if he needs it for his development. Again, but typically they ate shalosh sudas, let him wait a few minutes and he'll hear Havdalah. An extremely challenging and a geshmak shayla we just had just about a month plus ago is Tisha B'Av that falls on Motzei Shabbos. Let me refresh your memory. We typically make Havdalah, of course, Motzei Shabbos, but when Tisha B'Av Shechal B'Shabbos, we're not going to eat until Sunday night, so we don't make Havdalah until Sunday night. We make the bracha of Ner, but nothing else. The question is a child who is not fasting, obviously, and he's planning on having a malka that night. Why not? It's Motzei Shabbos. He wants to eat. Does he have to make Havdalah before he eats? Again, we don't make Havdalah because we don't eat, so we don't need Havdalah. He's going to eat. So, and it's not so hard to make Havdalah. Take a cup of grape juice. We don't use besamim. There the father's making anyhow, and he can make Havdalah and he can eat. L'chayra, this is totally in the above. Because if we can assume that a child's allowed to eat on Motzei Tisha B'Av, and since he's allowed to eat, there's no issa of eating before Havdalah. As we said, it's only an issa de Rabbanan, it's an issa zmani. So then you're allowed to eat before Havdalah. So why should he maybe a fruma and drink a revius of wine? You're not allowed to eat wine on Tisha B'Av, even grape juice on Tisha B'Av. If you don't need it, don't do it. But maybe Rabbi is not a hechsher to eat anything. It means when you have no other choice, you're allowed to eat. But you have a choice. Make Havdalah, and then you can eat beheta. And the truth is, a chayla that has to eat on Motzei Shabbos Tisha B'Av, we paskin makes Havdalah. So now the question is, Rabbi is a hechsher, but he could avoid the hechsher Rabbi by making Havdalah first and eating beheta. So the Maril Diskin in the Kunches Achan Siman Eisiv Kotnai and Beis seems to be machriya that he should make Havdalah. Usually with chayish is asi lemisrach. If you give him wine by a bris, by Tisha B'Av bris, he might come to drink wine more often. But then he said that doesn't apply here. He knows why he's making Havdalah because he's a cut. There's a very thorough tshuva of the Kleisenberg and Divrei Yatzav Siman Reish Mem Gimel, who's emphatic about it that a child should not eat before Havdalah al t'chashash eskera. So the child will have to make Havdalah and then esker zun tehait. But as you know, the minig is not like that. And the minig is that a child on Motzei Shabbos eats without Havdalah and he has Havdalah Sunday night. Why is a child different than a chayil that has to eat that makes Havdalah? So the teretz, we have all of our heterim. If it's not an it's an issa zmani, there's Rabbi Sayu. We have the Marshag's heta that the issa is a product of the chiyuv. He has no chiyuv, he's a cotton. So a chayil has a chiyuv Havdalah, has to make Havdalah. A katan, better off not to make Havdalah. But really there's another key factor here, that the chiyuv of chinuch is practice. Give him dal minim, show him how to shake, so when he gets older he does it also. But when he gets older, he's not going to be a katan. He's not going to make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos. So why this year, yes. So Rav Vozna in Chelik Zayin, Siman Ayin Zayin, Sif Katan Vav, somebody asked him, but so why do some people do make Havdalah? The Chayil Svar is a good Svar. So he says, yeah, but maybe when he gets older, he'll be a Chayla. So you have to give him chinuch now as a child to make Havdalah, because if Chalila, when he becomes a God, he'll be a Chayla. That's why he explains the Maril Diskin. But in Chelik Yud, Kuf Ayin Zayin, the Shevet Levi says, I didn't paskin to make Havdalah. I try to explain those that do make Havdalah, but he himself seemed to hold that the minig is not to make Havdalah. And the svara is, there's no chiv Havdalah, because as we said, he's a katan. And when he gets old, he's not going to make Havdalah. Besides that, there's no issa to eat for him before Havdalah. And there's no eskera. So why drink wine unnecessarily? Again, if someone says his minig is to make Havdalah for a katan, I can understand that. But the minig seems to be that we don't make Havdalah and we rely on the heta of Rabbi Sayu. The truth is, in Hilchos Shabbos, the katan is a different sugya, but I want to mention 2 points, linyanenu. Number one, let's say you go with your child to shul, and you want to give him something to eat in shul to keep him busy. We said he's allowed to eat before kiddush, but by giving him a pekel to carry, you're really helping him carry. You're safina on the issa vaitzah. Now, the truth is, when a child carries for a parent, that's a very serious issa deraisa on the parent's part. That's atu vincha, even lo yigil lechinuch, like lahagla behema. It's your chilul Shabbos, adult. I'm talking about the child's carrying a pekel for himself. So here we have the heta of the Rashba, if it's not of Sharab deraisa. The child is carrying in a karmelis, the Rabbanan, and that's for his purposes. That's for his ribisayu. And the Rashba says there's no Issa Safina by a Rabbanan. But says the Bialach in the end of Shin Mem Gimel, but for the child to carry a siddur or a sefer for the father, that's definitely wrong. That's the tzarech of the parent. But let's say the child's carrying for himself, and it's a Rabbanan situation, it's not a Rishadam Deraisa, it would be allowed, like the Rashba, to give a child a pekel to carry to shul. Now, if you live in a place that is a Rishadam Deraisa, the het of the Rashba won't apply. Ribisayu, so I have to know, Taki, if the child has nothing else to eat, then you can you're allowed to give it to him, or let him take it. If he's a lo yigil lechinuch. Now, of course, if he's a gil lechinuch, he can't carry. But a lo yigil lechinuch that needs the food, if he takes it on his own, you're allowed to let him. And even to give it to him, we have the heta based on the Rashba, if there's a heta, by a Rabbanan. Another fascinating sugya, the Blazer tells, of Blazer Gordon, one of the greatest lumdim of his times, I think it's the Rabbi Chaim Briska, he had a ha'ara lamaisa, or actually in the lumdim certainly he declared this shayla. A child's allowed to nurse from the mother until the age of 5. The question is, on Shabbos, why is it mutter? We're assuming that nursing, like Havdalah milking a cow, is a malacha deraisa mefarik. So why isn't this a safina, if the child could manage without that? So the Marzal Yo Simon Peidal Cut and Hay quotes this horror from a blazer, tells her, he said, but Lamaisa, the minig is that a child does nurse. So Mizalman and Shemir Shabbos discussed if a child could nurse right before this Mam Batzari Shabbos. Let the child wait a few minutes. And the truth is, this seems to be Safina. It's a young child, but Safina applies to a young child. So the basic teretz is, it's not an Issa Chefza. You have the Rashba's Heta, it's not Treif. And also, this is real Ribisayu. True, he doesn't need it, but Lamaisa, this is his development. And Taka, although you hear this occasionally today, we have viable options, there are formulas, maybe there's no heta nursing, but that's already playing with the Bar Shalom's world. The Bar Shalom made a world that mothers nurse, that's Ribisayu, and we don't have to worry, even though we could think that it's an Issa Deraisa. Maybe even the Raj's heta doesn't apply if this is Mefarik Deraisa. But the heta is, this is a real Ribisayu. Moving on to Pesach and Yonim, sometimes a child wants to eat matzah or Pesach. He doesn't want to, he's tired of potatoes and bread he can't have. Can a child be given matzah or Pesach? So the Chumas Hadeshin in Chelik Aleph Kuf Chafei was asked this question, and he said, Lo Yigil Chinuch is mutter. Now, we could wonder why Lo Yigil Chinuch is mutter. Safin is even by Lo Yigil Chinuch. Teretz is Pashit. It's an Issa Zmani, an Issa D'Rabbanan like the Rashba, and it could be Ribisayu. But says the Chumas Hadeshin, once the child is of age that he knows about Tzipah Yitzias Mitzrayim, so he has to wait to eat matzah like the rest of us until at night. Now obviously, he's not being saimach on the het of Ribisayu because you have other foods. You want to eat the matzah, okay, but you can have other foods. Your development doesn't need the matzah, it's your taste. That is not a het. And Taka in Tafai and Aleph Sibei, the Machaba quotes this Chumas Hadeshin, and the age of Yodeya about Tzipah Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Tzchak Yaakov says at Tafai Ayin Beis Sifkat and Chav Zayin is the age of 5 or 6. So a child over 5 or 6 should not be given matzah and Erev Pesach. The Magen Avraham in Shin Mem Gimel and in Taf Nun and Mishnah also in both places write Noihagen. I don't know why, but I'm telling you they write Noihagen. When a child has to eat chametz on Pesach, what do? Evidently, they didn't have so many different alternatives like we have today, and a child that was weak needed chametz on Pesach. but the Nahagin to give a child chametz on Pesach. What do? Now this is tricky because the logistics don't even make sense. Because a parent can have chametz out bal yirav matzah. And also we can't feed our child, forget about sapina, isahano, you can't feed a pet lahavdol. So, but the child needs chametz. So both Magen Avram and two places, Mr. Brew in both places say, the question is if I have a goy feed my child. Now, of course, not the goy takes my food because that's my problem. The goy takes his food, and I wasn't kind of the food. I say, do me a favor. He's doing it on his own with his food. The question is there an issa safina? Very interesting question. Safina means I supply my child. Let's say I tell the goy to supply my child. Is that included in safina? Maybe it's only a din in I giving, or maybe I'm supplying by telling the goy. So this is a machlokes gedoylei hapoiskim. And there are poiskim that hold that safina. It's lav dafka you, it's you are causing the child to have issa. And don't forget, chametz on Pesach, the Yishalmi says, is a real safina. And the Rugs HaPoisim and Chelik Aleph Kuf Lamachas says a kiddush, but I can understand it, that there's even timtum alev when you eat chametz on Pesach. Even though it's kosher bread. But for 8 days, it's an issa hana. So it's probably an issa chefza if there's an issa timtum alev. But then again, the fact that the child very much needs it overrides the issa of safina. So that's the chiddush. Baruch Hashem, today we don't even hear these shilas, but the Mishnah Berurah and Shin Mem Gimel and Tafnum, when you learn, you'll be surprised. I'm giving a child, I'm having a child be fed chametz by a guy. The answer is, you stay out of it. Don't use your own, you don't have chametz. The guy will give his chametz and hope that, like the sheet is, there's no safinan. The child's eating chametz, there's timtum, and a chanami, it's a problem. But if he needs it, a hechsher lo yiguna, we have to just give it to him. Again, today we don't rely on this heter, we have other foods, and don't forget about the timtum factor as well. Someone asked me an interesting question, to go back a few weeks ago. He had a 4-year-old child, can you give him meat during the 9 days? And the truth is, that question is a lot more challenging than it seems. Because the truth is that we find in halacha, regarding the 9 days, unique chumras. We don't wash, or we don't wash clothing of a child, even a young child. So the reasons given is, aveilus of a tzibur has to be complied by all. V'oid, agmas nefesh of the parent, when the parent sees, I can't wash my children's clothing, unless of course he needs it, there's nothing else to wear. Agmas nefesh of the parent is why the parent cannot do things for the child, lo yagi l'chinuch. And that's why the Dagam Revava, in Taf Kuf Nun Aleph, El Yerabba, Mishnah Berurah, Mishnah Zalman, and Amr Taf Tezayin passes like this, to give a child meat over the age of 3, even though he's lo yagia l'chinuch of aveilus. He doesn't know what aveilus is all about. But als the parents aveilus, you should not give the child to eat meat. Now that sounds fine, but the question is, what about Rabbi Sayu? We assume that meat is very important for the child's development. I mean, today they're worried about the cholesterol, but what about Rabbi Sayu? And Taka, the Divrei Yatziv, the Kleisenberger, and Simon Reish Lamed Vav, feels that if he's lo yagil l'chinuch of aveilus, al Rabbi Sayu, you're allowed to give a child meat to eat. The Or L'Tzion and Aleph Lamed Ches and the B'yoima and Yud Nun, they say for Sfardim the Zicha Heta, because the minig of 9 days is basically for Ashkenazim. Sfardim only shvush achalboy. So it's a really tricky issue. That really, it's a Tisha B'Av issue of aveilus for the father to see the child not eat meat. But if the child really needs it, so until the age of 3, all agree you're allowed to give a child meat. Above that age, even though he's lo yagil l'chinuch for aveilus, I wonder what the age of who feels aveilus. Even some adults don't feel aveilus. A little bit trickier issue. But zicha, above 3 years old, the minig of Ashkenazim, the minig of Mishnah Berurah, Mishnah Zalman, above 3, don't give him meat. If a child needs it, if he's weak, then there was what to be saimachan, even above the age of 3 is okay. Yom Kippur, let me be very clear, the minig, the mechabab, and that's the minig of Klal Yisrael, we're not choishes safinan. The Sefer Yosher had fruma that war, but you're allowed to feed your child, of course, that's the right age. and there's no problem of muktzah on the food because the child has to eat the food. The question, which is a pliya, but the Minchas Chinuch writes this in Shin Yud Gimel, the taka child's allowed to eat because he needs it. But once he ate and he has enough to live on, it's an issa safinan to feed the child more than he needs, which is very challenging. You have to know if the child is just to stop eating or if he needs it. But the poskim say, we're not choishes to this Minchas Chinuch, and when the child wants to eat, you're allowed to feed him and not have to ask him if this is just extra. The other question that we began with, the candy man doing his job on Yom Kippur, that's questionable. This is not a question of eating extra food. This is a question of eating food that's not Rabbi Sayu in the first place. And there are those that hold that just like on Tisha B'Av, on Tainis B'chlal, a person that has to eat should not eat fancy foods. Be mishtatev with the tzibur. The child should also be mishtatev with the tzibur. So the candy man has a day off on Yom Kippur. Now you might reason, well, Tisha B'Av is Avelis. Yom Kippur is a Yom Tiv. Let him enjoy Yom Tiv. But it's not that type of Yom Tiv that there's a mitzvah of Einig Yom Tiv on a child. So I can't say it's wrong, but the candyman should have a day off on Yom Kippur. Another interesting question, which we may assume, is a child eating out of the sukkah. So, of course, as we know, remember the Gemara, a katan she'ein sarach le'ima, he's independent and mature enough that he can manage on his own, is chayiv to eat in the sukkah. The poskim give the age between the age of 4 and 6, depending on the maturity of the child, especially if there's a father in the sukkah. So we are pretty much chayiv that from 4 on, the child that's a mature child has to eat in the sukkah. That's a giyul chinuch for sukkah. Now, you have to realize that for a parent to give a child to eat out of the sukkah who's already 6 years old, l'chol days is chayiv, is an issa chinuch, but it's also an issa safinan. You're giving a child to an issa. For a stranger, or better yet, for a caring grandmother, just eat. Don't go on the sukkah; it's too far. If the child's a higil chinuch, the grandma's being oiv on safina. The only shaila is, what about Rabbi Sayu? The child, it's food. He's eating a tuna fish sandwich. There it's his pashut. Go to the sukkah and eat your tuna fish sandwich. Not a het of food is a doichal terakula. If there's no other eitzah before kiddush in shul, there's no kiddush being made. The Yom Kippur, he has to eat. But if there's a sukkah, eat in the sukkah. And the truth is, I must tell you that the Adineza has his chiddush in Siman Tov Pei Aleph, that besides the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah, there's an issa of eating out of the sukkah. So you don't even have the heta that it's only a mitzvah, not an issa. This is an issa out of the sukkah. And it's possible that it might even be timtum alev. If there's an issa to eat out of the sukkah, maybe it's even timtum alev, which is a chiddush. I mean, I understand chametz of Pesach. We saw because of Baismos, there's timtum, because taka it's a hechsher d'isura all 8 days. But this is just a mitzvah sukkah. But the truth is, once he's a giyul chinuch, he should eat in the sukkah, and the Messiah doesn't play a role. What I found amazing, the Mishnah says in Sukkah Daf Chav Ches, the famous Mishnah, Ma'aseh the Hilni Amalka, that she had a newborn baby and she put him in the sukkah. That sounds like a very, really extreme chiddush. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky in his original Sefer Shain Halach Shin Mem Gimel, maybe Shammai held Pashat Sapinan applies even to a Ben Yoimai. And he didn't want to have to of Rabbi Sayu, obviously, because you go in the sukkah, which is a pretty big chiddush. But we don't paskin like Shammai, and of course a baby until the age of 4 to 6 is not chayiv in sukkah, and therefore there's no issa of safina. The question of giving a child milk after meat, so people are very makbid about this, but the truth is there is a tzad to be made. Let me explain. There's no issa deraisa of eating milk products after meat. In fact, there's no issa deraisa of eating chicken with milk. The issa deraisa is like sabashal gedi basa behema with chalav. Milk after meat is an issa derabbanan. The minig of waiting 6 hours, the halig of minig, the shach writes, whoever plays with the minig, yishchenu nachas chas v'shalom. But the ikad din, the Ramah does not quote the minig of 6 hours. The Ramah quotes 1 minig of waiting an hour. So the truth is, under the age of 3, a child can eat meat, and right afterwards milk. He's lo yigiyul chinuch. Ai safinon. This is Rabbi Sayu. Milk is an important part of the child's growth, and also It's a pina by a minig? Who said? After 3, there's a minig ha'olam, quote unquote, that we start having the child wait a little bit. The Chalkas Yaakov and Yeridei Siman Tezayin through Yudches, a little more makel than 3. He says until 9 he feels there's only a minig, you could be more makel. But after 3 years old, a child should start waiting an hour. If the child insists he's thirsty and wants milk, you're allowed to give it to him because of Hibasayu. So the waiting that we find by children is a chumrah, which is a good chumrah because 6 hours is part of our chinuch. But until the age of 3, there's no makam l'hachmer. Beyond 3, an hour is enough until he's really yigil l'chinuch that he can wait the 6 hours to have his milk. Now, ice cream maybe is more of a problem, but definitely the milk when a child wants it until 3, there's nothing to talk about. Even beyond, after an hour, it's okay. The last question is probably the most important because it's really touched upon a big side of our sugya. I heard someone told me that he had a vitamin, he couldn't verify the kashrus, but he gave it to his child because nara kind. Now that's a serious mistake. I mean, I'm not getting involved in the kashrus of that vitamin, but assuming the vitamin is treif, you're playing with a very serious issue. First of all, if it's taka treif, this is safina. This is the real McCoy safina. You're giving him a chefz d'isur. But besides that, we come to a fact that we have to clarify because it's negeya, and that is even if he's lo yagil l'chinuch, a tarfus has a devastating effect on a child's neshama, and that's the concept of timtum alev. I can't explain it, but I can tell you halacha psuka in Yeridei Pei Aleph Zayin that a child, a Yiddish child, should not nurse from a mitzvah, from a goyish woman, because the milk that he will take in will be metamtem es halev. Now this is not treif in that sense of the word, but wait, the Shulchan Aruch goes weiter. A woman that, the way the Shach and Taz explained, that is mechuyev to eat tarfus. She's a choyla mesukena, she must eat this tarfus. She has to eat it. She should not nurse her child afterwards. Now she's not giving the child leftovers. She's dam nekev and asachol, it was transformed into milk, but she should not nurse her child because it's metamtem es halev. Mazik bizik nusay. Now this is Chol of Yisrael, it's not a Goyish woman, but somehow the Timtum overrides its transformation. And the Shach says, because Tarfus is Metamtem Esalei, the Amshar Shloim Yevamas Yudalid Zion points out that like Yishalmi Acher went off the derech because his mother had a Reach Avodah Zarah, the Timtum Alev. And the real Pachad, the Pri Chodesh and Our Simon Pei Aleph Sikot and Chavav, he says that Roiv Bonim, Roiv Bonim Bizmaneinu go off the derech because of Timtum Alev. They eat tarfus, beyoidim, uvolo yoidim. So who knows, they say, I think Sam Rabban said every American boy has a little bit of a tarfus in his neshama, Vinishvi. I hope that's not true, but we don't look for trouble, that's for sure. And the pachad is that tarfus is something we can't explain it. The woman's eating hechsher. She has a mitzvah to eat the tarfus, but somehow it affects the child. There's a lot to say, but the Chaim in his famous tshuva in Archaim Pei Gimel about a child that was a shaitam. And the question is putting him in an institution, in a home that will feed him and take care of him. But Chaim is worried about the Timtum Alev. It was a Goyish home. Now, obviously, if there's a heter to do it, what's Timtum? Timtum is really beyond heterim. Timtum is a metzias. And I'll leave you with a story I heard from one of my Rabbeim, a Talmud of Briskirov. And once he came into the Shia, he says, and I can't calm myself down. He just read a story and it's printed in a number of svarim. Kivega was once in a certain city. He was traveling and he stopped off in the city and they came to him for brachas, for eitzes. A woman came crying that she has a number of sons, mitzuyanim, and the youngest son, Ben Zakunim, Pashut, he can't chap Torah. Nothing goes. They try tunas. There's an unnatural problem here. Kivega asked him, did the child ever eat tarfus? The lady said, Rebbe, my child tarfus, chas v'sholem. Did he ever eat out of the house? Rebbe, my child, I'm very makbid. Ask him if he ever ate out of the house. So she went to ask the child. The child said once on the way home from yeshiva, he stopped up by a chasana and ate a piece of meat. Kivega says, find out which chasana it was.